Borg continues that even within those of us who have, if you're one of those, who have a religious worldview, there are many different ways to think about God. On one end, we have folks who think of God as out there, like a person separate from us, who creates and who intervenes. On the other end, we have people who see God as all-encompassing spirit. The universe is not separate from God, but is in God. The way to think of God in this perception is to talk about divine intention, divine interaction, rather than intervention. Divine intention, God's will and wanting and yearning for us. God's interaction working through us and among us, rather than God's working through intervention. However, Borg says, no matter what your image of God is, it's your relationship with God that's much more important than your image of God. And so, what do I believe in? Well, when I see nature and spring bulbs pop up through the ground each year, I see God. When I see a sunset and see the beauty of that sunset, I see God. When I see the human body and the detailed, interrelated systems of our body and how the body can heal itself, I see God. When Diane creates a musical masterpiece, and when we hear it, that creativity that she connects with, I hear God. And when in service I make last-minute changes and she has to ad-lib and she does that, I thank God. When I see art that is done beautifully, I see God. When I see people solve a difficult problem by reaching a level of creativity, I see God. When I see a new invention that comes forward to improve the life of the world, I see God. When I experience creativity and gratitude and awe, I experience the presence of God. And occasionally, very occasionally, but occasionally I've experienced the miraculous in my life that could be explained in no other way than the presence of God. When I see all of this, when I stop and see all of this, I see God. The true story is told of a violinist, this violinist, who in January of 2007 went to a subway station, metro station in Washington, D.C., and he played 6 Bach pieces for about 45 minutes. And about 2,000 people quickly rushed by while he was playing. Some listened for a second or two. Some children wanted to stop, but their parents tugged them along. Come on, keep moving. During this 45 minutes, only 6 people stopped to listen. And only about 20 people gave money as they continued to walk along their way. And in the time, the 45 minutes, he collected $32. At the end, he stopped playing. Silence took over. No one noticed. No one applauded. There was no recognition. No one knew that this violinist was Joshua Bell, one of the greatest musicians in the world. And he was playing on a violin worth $3.5 million. And only 2 days before that, he had played before a sold-out theater in Boston. Very few people stopped and noticed the beauty. So often in our lives, we rush past the beauty, the creativity, and the awe, and we miss seeing God. I respect that there are folks who see the same things that I see, who see and recognize the same beauty and the same majesty, but when they see it, they do not see God. I have deep respect for folks who claim to be agnostic, and deep respect for folks who claim to be atheist. They see the same thing that I see, but they have a different perspective. I see God, they do not see God. I think we have demonized and brutalized people who have a different perspective than we do. A few years ago, the National Gallery of Canada purchased a painting called The Voice of Fire, this one that you see in front of us. It's a large, large painting. It was painted in 1967. They bought it in 1989 for $1.8 million. When John sees that painting, he sees creativity, he sees power, he sees intentionality. When I see that painting, I see two paint rollers, one going up and down, and one going up the middle. I do not see $1.8 million. In fact, I was talking to my sister this morning, and she may be watching and horrified that I'm telling you this, but when I was talking to her about this, and she looked at it and she said, "No way. $1.8 million, there had to have been a relative on that committee that bought that painting." All of us seeing sometimes the same thing, but having different perspectives. I believe that when you look at nature and the human body and the creativity around us and all of those other things, I think the most reasonable assumption is that there is a God. The most reasonable assumption is that there is something more behind all of this. The God that I believe in is both creator and co-creator. The God I believe in loves us unconditionally and is unconditional love. The God is beyond us and within us and among us. The God weeps and laughs and hopes for the best for us. This God gives us our freedom to make choices. This God more often works through us than for us. More often. This God constantly reaches to us, within us, and yet gives us space. This God is as close and as constant as the air we breathe. This God is less about intervention, although I have experienced divine, dramatic interventions in my life. This God is less about intervention and more about intention and goodwill and wanting the best for us, and there to help us repair it when things don't go right. I believe that I come from this God, and that this God dwells within me. I believe that you come from this God, and that this God dwells within you and among us. The call for us is to be open to experience this God, to experience the more in our lives. How do I know this God exists? Yes, it's part of my faith conditioning. But I know this God exists down deep in my gut. Jesus lived an authentic life, so authentic and so connected to God that he was able to say without bragging, "If you have seen me, you have seen God." Many of us believe that if you want to see what God is like in human form, if you want to see what God would be like fully realized as a human being, that we can look to Jesus as an example of the healer God, the compassionate God, the God who gets angry at injustice. So, I hope that I am able to live my life in such a way that shows that if God exists, as I believe God does, that shows that I was connected to this more, to this God. That I worked in such a way that I was connected, that I was occasionally an expression of that more in our world, and that people sometimes saw that more, that God in me. And I hope that I was able to call together a diverse group of people who were also seeking to connect to that more in deeper ways, who are also being an expression of that God in our world, and that people saw God in them, that people saw God in you. Yes, I believe that God exists. I am less concerned with proving that than I am concerned with living a life that expresses it. God in me and through me for our world. God in you and through you for our world. Amen.